who will be relegated from the Premier League. Let's try and pick 3 teams from this scrap right now, because the race against relegation, this is pretty much the most intense it's ever been. You can see the Premier League this week put out a message saying that at this point of a season, it's the tightest it's ever been between 12th place and 20th place in the Premier League table. I mean, it's crazy. There's 4 points between Palace in 12th and Southampton, who are bottom there in 20th position. I mean, Nick, what are you looking forward to in this relegation battle? Because when we look at the remaining fixtures, there's so many games against each other now, because essentially nearly half the league are in this together. So I feel like every weekend now we are going to have 3 or 4 games which are relegation 6-pointers, and that is lovely, lovely stuff for drama. Not so great if you're someone like me whose team is involved in the thick of it, but it's still fun to be fighting for something, I think.
Joe, you told me a few weeks ago, hey, let's put together this post on the remaining fixtures for the teams in this big fight. And so I had that duty of kind of eyeballing the whole thing. And I realized that the key to the season is when Gary O'Neill's and if Gary O'Neill's team quits. Because if you look at their schedule, they still play everyone around them. So there's a scenario where they get mashed in 2/3 of their games, but win 2 or 3 and come up. But they still play, ready for this? In the last 7 games of the season, they'll play West Ham, Saints, Leeds, Palace, and Everton. Like, that is nuts. So they can actually think like, oh, things can go poorly for them. So I think they're kind of the key here. Every other team, to me, you make the case for them getting out based on sort of quality, or based on maybe them getting some bounces, maybe riding a wave of momentum. Like Saints could be coming off of like bad time for the international break for Southampton. You want to have another game ahead of you this week. But I do think that it's a little muddled. I know how close it is, but Everton to me, West Ham to me, Leicester and Wolves are all teams that are better than this. And win 2 games in a row, you'll be feeling a whole lot better about it. I really do think we're talking about 5 teams maybe.
Andy, Nick's point there, something I've been thinking about a lot. It's teams that probably are better. The quality of their squad suggests they should be maybe battling for European spots or comfortably in mid-table, but they're not. And I wonder down the stretch in the next few months, psychologically, if you're Leicester City and some of the star internationals they have, West Ham, even Wolves, it's like, hang on, this isn't what I signed up for. We were supposed to be pushing for the Europa League or going deep in cup competitions. We aren't meant to be in a relegation battle. This isn't the kind of style of play I enjoy, where you look at some of the other teams, Nottingham Forest, Bournemouth just come up, even Saints with a lot of young players, and even Leeds to a certain degree. You kind of expected to be in this situation. So this isn't coming as a big shock to you, where you've got the last 8 to 10 games of a season where it's like, we need to save ourselves now. So how does that kind of play into this factor? Because I think some clubs, almost in their DNA of the clubs, they're expecting each season to be in a relegation battle, but other teams aren't. And I wonder how that can help the mood around the place, because as we said, it's so tight that you're going to need to recover very quickly from any knockbacks. And this isn't terminal. We can still the next week get ourselves from 18th place to 12th with 1 win. And that's how it's going to be for the rest of the season for all these clubs.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it makes me look at West Ham and Leicester specifically and realize they still have a card to play if they are in this situation a month from now. They are the 2 teams down there, and you could throw Forest in there, but what they've done with Steve Cooper, re-upping him with a new contract this season already when there were questions about him going early on, they could decide to move on from David Moyes. They could decide to move on from Brendan Rodgers. And every other team in the relegation scrap this season has already made a managerial change. So you wouldn't expect that that's going to happen. And so that's a card that still can be played by those clubs. I think, Nick, you guys are both right. None of those teams, and you can throw Wolves into that conversation as well, should be down there. But the fact is, they have just been so poor this season. It's not that they've been unlucky, that they've had a couple bad breaks or bad results. All of those 3 clubs, and I guess Wolves a little bit less so because not quite as much as expected of them, not quite the money invested into the team, not quite the aspirations of being in Europe as the other 2. But Leicester and West Ham have just been awful for most of the season, and I've watched plenty of them both of them this season to be able to say that. And so the fact that they're down there, it's on merit. The quality typically will show through, but if they find themselves in a situation late in a game, even later into the season, and they have to dig deep and find something, we don't know that any of those players in that squad have that within them, because they have not been in that situation before. And there is something to the experience of having been through a relegation battle before. It's why Leeds, to me, doesn't even really come to mind when I'm considering this. To me, I think we know Southampton. I think we know Bournemouth at this point as well. Forest seems the other one. They had about a 3-week run right after the World Cup break that we all said, oh, okay, they're fine now. They've gotten enough points. They've banked them away. I think they have 2 points since then. And so they are right back down there, and they are now, 1 or 2 wins for other teams away from being into the bottom 3 once again. And I just don't know how, for the second time this season, in an extended slide, how they come out of that, especially with the schedule that they've still got to go. I think it's United, Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, and I'll even throw Brentford in there as a team that you have to look at on the fixture list and say, that's going to be a tough one to get anything out of that game.
Yeah, looking at that, that's key, right, Nick? Because obviously we mentioned Bournemouth and Crystal Palace as well have very easy remaining schedules on paper, at least. And obviously Roy Hodgson coming back in at Palace, he might be thinking, 3 or 4 wins out of this final 10 games, and we should be okay. But also that all the teams they're playing around the bottom will be earmarking that game against them and saying we got to win this. So that just adds even more jeopardy and intrigue and drama. But Nick, in the post on Pro Soccer Talk that you put together, you predicted who would finish on what points, and you have Nottingham Forest, Leeds, and Southampton all finishing on 35 points, and Forest just staying up on goal difference. So, and there's there's just 4 points again separating the teams that are going down between. You have West Ham and finishing in 13th place on 39 points. So, what I'm trying to say is this could change just within a game, right? The margins are so small that I watched Wolves against Leeds at the weekend. You look at the XG from that game. Wolves were expected to beat Leeds comfortably. Leeds win 4-2. Just some crazy decisions, big moments going either way. And that's what it's hard to predict this. This is so difficult right now because momentum, all of it goes into it. And all you need is one of your key players to get hot at this point of the season. And it can really drag you out of the relegation zone, can't it?
Or to get hurt. And I mean, honestly, to me, I look at Wolves. I think they are a lot better. Like, I don't even want to consider them in they kind of bossed Leeds. I mean, Leeds got chances, but that was, especially actually, you mentioned that, I pulled it up, like it wasn't close. It was almost 3-2. But I'm going to murder his name. Kalajic, who they brought in to big money, big buy this summer to finish chances. And he's been out, and we haven't seen other guys get it done. Raul Jimenez has kind of been a shell of what we've expected. Not a shell of himself, but a shell of what we've come to see about him. He just hasn't rebounded. And that one guy, I mean, was it the first or second game of the season that he tears his ACL? We are at a point we used to be teams don't spend. Well, now everybody spends, but not everybody spends on depth. They get that piece. And we don't know if he would have acclimated to the Premier League super duper well, but it's fair to say he's probably at least 3-4 points better if he's out there.
Yeah, it's an option in a position where they're incredibly short and have gotten essentially nothing for 2 seasons since Raul Jimenez had his head injury. And that's just the reality of the situation.
Andy, who are we going with then? Give me 3 teams right now. Obviously, it's going to change a lot, and most teams have got 11 games to go. Some have got 10, some have got 12. Yeah. So there's a lot of variables here. But if you had to pick now, and you do, which 3 teams?
It'll be, sorry, Joe, Southampton.
Yep.
They have tried to come back to life enough times this season and halfway gotten there and then just fallen back enough times that I just don't see it happening for them at this point. And Bournemouth, I think, on the whole of the season, from everything I've seen, probably the worst team in the Premier League, and so I think that warrants relegation. And I do think it's Forest as the other one, and it'll be West Ham escaping by the skin of their teeth, and probably a really, really big. Just look at everything, the way that club does everything in the summer, and just a reassessment going forward. But they'll be in the Premier League next season, but just barely.
Nick?
The Cherries are out. The Saints are out. And Leeds. I'm just going to stick with my guns on the whole. I don't think their performances have matched. Gracia may make the right moves, and he may prove himself that Watford did him dirty, but I think it's still going to take a lot of work. Guys, keep an eye. And again, I made that post. There are something like 6 or 7 games in the first 8 days after the break that are 6-pointers. And so we should see a lot of clarity there. So, of course, given this season, they'll all be draws.
Yeah. It will still be status quo, right, heading into the final few weeks. I'm going to go with Bournemouth. I'm going to go with Nottingham Forest. And then I'm going to go with Leeds. I think Saints will stay up. I've seen my entire life as a supporter. I think they've been in the Premier League 23 years now. And I'm going to go ahead and say 16 to 17 of those years have been relegation battling seasons. Yeah. And they just seems to be the entire they know what's coming. Everyone knows what's coming. They've got themselves, apart from once when they did get relegated in 2005, they just keep getting themselves out of these situations. And I mentioned it earlier. It's not about the spirit, the DNA. A lot of the young players there now are learning. Lavia, Bazzuno, Sulemana's come in and done really well.
Yep.
Alakotchap. I just think now there is some kind of plan under Ruben Sellers that I think they're going to stay up. Don't ask me how they're going to do it. And look at the schedule. They've got a tough remaining schedule. But I think my big prediction is Saints are going to just about do it. It's going to go down to the final day, just like it did last season. It's not going to be pretty, but Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest, and Leeds. Those are the 3 teams I think is going to go down. But I mean, ask me next week after the international break. After the first round, it could change totally. So head over to Pro Soccer Talk and NBCSports.com for all the latest on the relegation scrap between now and the end of the season. As Nick said, there's going to be a lot to update on all of those articles because there are so many teams involved.
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lowe, studio host for NBC's coverage of the Premier League. Don't forget to hit subscribe to watch more videos all season long. For even more Premier League content, from original series to live matches, head over to Peacock and be sure to tune in for Premier League mornings every weekend on USA Network and on Peacock. We will see you over there.